All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Howard, and I am the principal here at Lisle High School, and I want to wish you all a happy Veterans Day, and any veterans that are here today, thank you for your service. And I want to thank you all for tuning in this morning for our webinar on our COVID-19 procedures and processes. Through the last couple of weeks, we started bringing students back to Lisle in our blended learning format on October 19th. And in that time, we've learned a great deal about managing COVID-19 here at the high school, and wanted to kind of share with you, as we've gone through some of these processes, what is actually happening kind of behind the scenes, so that you have better awareness and we can answer any questions that you might have. So I want to begin by just giving you some general reminders here on our webinars. This webinar is being recorded this morning. We will post this, we'll convert it to a YouTube link, and then we'll put that link on our website where we keep our principals' messages on that principals' message page on the high school site. We also want to welcome you to ask any questions that you have during the webinar. We'll get to the questions as we get through our brief presentation. Just go to the toolbar and click on the Q&A, and you can type in your question. And depending on the question, we may be able to provide a quick answer. I have some helpers behind the scenes that might be able to give you an answer if it's a quick one, but if not, we will hold it until the end, and then we'll address it verbally at the end. Joining me behind the scenes here for our webinar today is our Assistant Principal of Student Services, Jen Zimmerman, our Assistant Principal of Curriculum and Instruction, Sherry Costello, and our school nurse, Darlene Musbach. Darlene is also a certified contact tracer. She took a class at Johns Hopkins University over the summer so that we were ready for this as the school year began. So we rely a great deal on her advice. So she is also joining us for this webinar this morning. Just to get started, our target for this morning, and I'm not really sure how long this is going to take, but we just want to kind of go through and try to establish as clearly as we can what are the procedures and processes that relate to COVID-19 here at the high school. And that can mean any number of things. It can address how are we cleaning classrooms, or how are we maintaining distance as kids move around the building. Or it can also mean, once we do have if we do have a positive case, what happens then? And what happens if that is in the classroom? What happens if that is in the school bus? What happens if it's on in the basketball court? So we can go in a number of different directions, and for the most part, I'll let the questions kind of guide that. I'm just going to give you a basic understanding of where we've been since we brought students back on October 19th, and where we are now, and where we hope to move in the coming weeks. So when we started the school year and we were preparing to come back in August, we knew that health and safety was going to be our top priority. It has to be our top priority. And we have done absolutely everything we can possibly do to work with the DuPage County Health Department to ensure that our students and our staff have the safest environment possible. And so even from the beginning, we distributed health and safety and these guiding principles here you see outlined in orange as what we were going to do from the beginning of the year. And that was with the DuPage County Health Department kind of overseeing us, that these were our priorities. The use of PPE, everyone's going to wear a mask. At that time, it was, prohibiting 50 individuals. That number has since reduced. And so we utilize these guidelines and still almost on a daily basis utilize the guidelines from the DuPage County Health Department in running this building. You will see, and you see here down in blue, there are a couple of reminders and things that to remember. First of all, this is changing constantly. I cannot emphasize that enough. The DuPage County Health Department guidelines change, the CDC nationally changes, the Illinois Department of Health changes. And so what we may put in place and we may say at one time can literally change within a few days or a week or a month. So that's very difficult. It's very difficult for teachers. It's very difficult for school administrators when things change. We'd like to say this is the way it is and that's the way it's going to remain, but things change. And I know a lot of people have said in different circumstances, well, what about the CDC? The CDC says this. And in this particular case, if the CDC and the Illinois Department of Health are different from the DuPage County Health Department, we are sticking with the DuPage County Health Department because in that they are local and they are taking local conditions into account, and we feel it's the most relevant for our students here at Lisle. And one other thing I want you to keep in mind is that the DuPage County Health Department is serving as an advisor to all of the schools in DuPage County and all of the families in DuPage County, and they don't necessarily get back to us right away when we would like them to. So sometimes we have to be patient when we have questions because we said, well, what about this or what about that? And it's taken a while for them to get back to us. So we have to go with what we know from them until they tell us to change it. So our general point today is to kind of take you through a little process that when we have a student that is showing symptoms of COVID-19 or has tested positive for COVID-19, what exactly happens? And so you can see here in our little diagram, first, what we're going to hope is that if your student is showing symptoms of COVID, and I would hope that we are all somewhat familiar with what those symptoms are like, fever, coughing, that you would keep them home. You would not certify them on the daily certification and you would keep them at home. That's the best case scenario. Now, they may be fine when they leave and they come here, but they might start showing symptoms while they're here. If that happens, they will come down to the nurse and the nurse will look at them, and then the nurse will contact you as the parent, and then the student will be sent home from there. So in either of those situations, the student is at home. And what we're going to expect is that the student will be at home and isolated for 10 days. And I'm not making that number up. That is coming from the DuPage County Health Department, and none of this is made up by us. We're going with what they're telling us. The student needs to be isolated for 10 days. Now, the student can get a COVID test in that time, and then we would probably want to communicate with the school nurse about how things are proceeding. A probable case or a positive case will then check off our box to begin the contact tracing piece of the student and the student's diagnosis. Contact tracing um, will look at the student's movement for up to 48 hours prior. So if, let's say, student Susie came to class and she was in her first and second hour class, started developing symptoms, and then came down to the nurse and was sent home. And if that were to happen today here on, let's just say, Wednesday, we would have to go back and trace her movements back to Monday, 48 hours prior, particularly in the classes that she was in. She was in first and second hour, and we would go back to wherever she was here in the building on those 2 days and who she encountered. It can be overwhelming. And part of the process that's missing for us is when Susie is at home or Susie is not in the building. I don't really know who or what she's encountering when she's not here. All we can do is look at the building. And so let's say we identified her first hour class. If we go to that class, our process is pretty much the same. We have seating charts that we have for every single class. And we would check the attendance of that class, during which we would see who was there, who was not, where everyone is seated. And we, as a general rule, have all of our desks seated, spaced at 6 feet apart. But that's sometimes not always easy to enforce. Sometimes there are activities that might move desks around. And so we have to go into each individual class asking the similar questions. Where were the desks? Where were the students? Etc. We talk to the teacher. We try to understand what the activities were. Some classrooms, don't have a lot of kids in them, and so they are way over 6 feet, and therefore nothing is required ultimately. So it's just important that we continue to ask questions and have the teacher involved in that process. We then report those findings to the DuPage County Health Department, and inevitably they're going to come back with us and help us sort through two potential situations. Students and the teacher in that classroom will either be categorized as high risk or low risk. And if they are high risk, that you will get a call if your student, not the primary student, but the other students in the class. If your other student is in that class, you'll get a call from the nurse. And she will explain to you that even if your child is not exhibiting any symptoms, that they are going to need to be quarantined for 14 consecutive days. Well, what makes a kid high risk? And it's generally about close contact with the primary student. So if we have a student that has tested positive, was in the first hour class, and your student had close contact with them during a class period, which is more than 15 minutes, then chances are likely that your student is going to be quarantined for 14 days. Now, even this is also according to the county health department, even if you go out and get your student a COVID test that says they are negative, that does not mean they can just come right back to school. They still need to maintain the 14 days of quarantine that they were originally signed to do, and that's per the county health department. Those are the high-risk conditions. Chances are likely, however, that if your student was in the class with the primary, then they would be deemed low risk. If they sat across the room, they would be considered low risk. And if they're considered low risk, then you will get an email from me, and that email will contain a low-risk letter from the county health department, just going through what are the symptoms, what does low risk mean, things that you need to watch for, and just kind of keep an eye on your student in the coming days, but they can return to school. A low-risk student is not held out of the building for any reason. One other thing I want to point out for the high-risk students, we are in a blended learning format. So if your student is categorized at high risk, it doesn't mean they are not in school. It means that we will make accommodations for them to be online remotely for all of their class periods. Even if they're supposed to be here in person, they would still be able to access that class remotely. So last thing I want to mention before we open it up for questions, as a parent, as a community member, what can I do to help? And believe me, we need everyone's help in trying to combat this. First, be honest about the daily certification. It's very easy to just click off that report, hit that button, and send them. I know, I get it. I'm a parent myself. I can understand that having them stay home is a bigger pain than you would like it to be. But we need to be honest so that we can identify any potential spread of this disease ultimately in the building. So being honest on the daily certification, even if it means they stay home. Strictly adhering to the isolation or quarantine guidelines once they've been communicated to you. If your student is a high risk and they're going to be quarantined, our nurse is going to be in very close contact with you, so there should not be any confusion about what day the quarantine starts and what day they return back to school. Now, the county health department has switched up exactly the timing for us of what those days are. So even if it's the point of contact, or is it the first day is when they're the first day at home, we've worked that out, and if that should happen, whatever our nurse is telling you is the most up-to-date information that we have from the county health department. We also need you to be in communication regarding your student's health. If the student goes into isolation and appears to be fine and there are no real health conditions, they're tested negative, keep in touch with Darlene Musbach, our school nurse, and let us know. The more communication we have with your household, the better off we will be in making some of these determinations. And I would say, as a parent, doing your part outside the building, as I mentioned before, that's the part we don't control. And I feel very good about the control we are exerting here in the building. But when they leave, I have no idea. I have no idea who they're getting in cars with. I have no idea what parties they're going to. I have no idea where they're playing basketball. Are they wearing masks or not? I don't know. So it's very difficult for us. So I would encourage all of you as parents to do your part to help us mitigate the virus when students are outside of the building. So with that, I am going to, because I'm imagining we probably have more questions than, and you don't really want to hear me continue to talk, especially since we have the nurse available. So I am going to unmute our assistant principals and our nurse, Darlene Musbach, and see if we have any questions. Then do we have questions at this point?
Yes, Mr. Howard, can you hear me?
Yes.
We have one question that has come in. Can you comment on ventilation in the school, either modifications to HVAC to prevent recirculating the stale air or other methods of ventilation such as air filtering or opening windows? I do know that our buildings and ground people went over our HVAC and to make sure it was meeting the CDC guidelines, which it does. Classrooms that do have windows are able to open those. Many of ours don't, but we have been instructed that our HVAC meets the standards from the CDC. Mr. Howard.
Yeah, so, and that's exactly right. At the very beginning of this, we had our HVAC system completely checked. And that's what we were told. Our HVAC system complies with all of the regulations and guidelines for airflow. We have windows that will open, but not all classrooms have windows. And contrary to our safety and security protocols we put in place last year, we now have all of the doors open. So that some air does get into those rooms that do not have windows. But Jen is right. The HVAC system has met the guidelines.
Okay, Mr. Howard, what is the number of COVID positive students and or staff that would trigger a move to remote learning? Does this number change based on whether the infection was acquired at school or outside of school? And is it school by school decision or a district-wide decision?
Let me take that question in a couple of parts. I think it's a very good question. It's a question that's being asked a lot around here, especially lately. There are 3 categories of data that the district is looking at. So I think this is a district decision, but that doesn't mean that we would all go remote, all 3 buildings at once. The 3 areas are the county and what the county health department is saying, and our zip code, the Lisle zip code, and what that is saying, and the district, specifically within the district, each of the 3 schools. I know I met with the superintendent yesterday, and while we're seeing a lot of schools around us go straight, just going from blended to remote, our numbers at Lisle have not shown what those other schools' numbers are showing. We have not had a significant increase in student positives or staff positives. And I think I don't want to dismiss that staff number. A lot of our schools, surrounding schools that we've talked to, it's the staff number and their inability to staff the building that is pushing them to go remote. And we have not had that. Now, I would love to say it's because of everything we're doing around here to ensure the safety of staff and students that our numbers are not there. I am going to say that, but I'm also going to say that we have very low numbers to begin with. We're not walking the halls with 1,600 students. That has been very beneficial. I think I got everything. So we're watching the school numbers right now to see if we see a spike in the school numbers, student numbers and staff numbers, we will go remote. I'm not hesitant to do that, but I am hesitant to do it if we're not seeing a spike. I did, as I mentioned, I talked to Dr. Filipiak yesterday, and he will be sending communication to the entire district and parents and staff by the end of this week, getting more specific in the metrics and what we're looking at in terms of actual numbers. If I missed something on that question, go ahead and ask again, but I think I got it.
I'm going to wait a second. That was our last question. So I'm going to just give it a second to see if anybody has any further questions that we can answer at this time.
We have been pleasantly surprised, as I've said in the principal's message for the last few weeks, with our students and our students' adherence to the guidelines and the rules that we've put in place. I think you'd be impressed watching them walk around here, even self-distancing. They will go into a bathroom and recognize how many people are in the bathroom and literally stand outside of the bathroom. They walk in the one-way fashion that we have laid down. So I'm so pleased with how all of our students are really trying to make this work.
At this time, Mr. Howard, there are no further questions.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you for joining us. If you do think of a question that we haven't hit, did one just come in, Jen?
a parent would just like us to know that they believe that we have done a great job managing this in a very difficult situation.
It is a difficult situation. And as I said, I think for me, I can only speak for myself. A lot of the difficulty is just coming from what we don't know and what is going to be changing. I can't say that we are not going to go remote ever again. I can't say that once the holidays hit and everyone is out of here for a few days, that we won't see numbers spike and we might need to go remote. However, right now, today, things are good, and we're hoping that we stick to it, and that our kids and your families can stick to the guidelines and allow us to continue having kids come into the building.
Another positive comment, thank you, which these are great to hear as well. So we really appreciate it. Is we have a couple of parents that are thanking that we have shared this information and continuing to update and educate the community, and to just please continue to do that, and that they really appreciate the communication piece that we are doing here at the high school.
Yeah, I completely understand being a parent, sitting behind the computer, being reliant on institutions for communication. I know even in our house, we don't get the communication that we need. That's been a top priority for us here. And I hope you feel like you know what's going on, you have a grasp of the situation. And I hope you also feel that if you do have any questions, you can certainly ask. If we don't know the answer, we're going to do our best to try to find out. So thank you. I appreciate you being here with us today, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.